The A-10 Warthog is ripping through Iranian fast boats in the Strait of Hormuz. Clips of it are spreading everywhere. The numbers keep rising, and people around the world are watching, reacting, and then moving on, convinced the situation is under control. That confidence may be the most dangerous thing in the Persian Gulf right now. Not the fast boats, not the naval mines, not the missile systems stretched along Iran's coastline. The real danger is the reassuring, footage-driven belief that if the A-10 is winning these encounters, then the wider problem must already be handled. But that belief hides something critical. The A-10 is not resolving the crisis in Hormuz. It is making the crisis look manageable. Those are two very different things, and the distance between them is exactly where major strategic failures take shape quietly, one encounter at a time, while everyone is distracted by dramatic visuals. So it is worth asking the question that the footage makes easy to ignore. What is the real mission here? It is not simply taking out boats. That is only one task. The true mission is to guarantee safe passage, consistently and without interruption, for every tanker, every LNG carrier, and every container ship carrying roughly 20% of the world's oil through a narrow 21-mile choke point. Not just on a clear afternoon with solid intelligence and an A-10 already in position, but every day, every night, and in every set of conditions. That is an entirely different challenge. Right now, those two challenges are being treated as if they are the same. And that confusion, where tactical wins are mistaken for strategic progress, is how you become extremely active, highly confident, and still completely trapped. To understand why, start with something people rarely say about the A-10. It cannot operate on its own. The Warthog depends on a forward airbase close enough to the fight. It needs constant intelligence to identify where the threat is. It needs controlled airspace so it can fly without unnecessary risk from friendly forces or hostile fire. It depends on maintenance teams, fuel supply, and a non-stop chain of ammunition resupply. Remove even one of those elements and the aircraft loses much of its value. The A-10 is not a standalone answer. It is the visible edge of a massive logistical structure, and that structure has limits, weak points, and a cost that grows every single day. That matters because the A-10 cannot cover everything at once. It can operate at a sustainable pace, but not at an unlimited one. And the Strait of Hormuz is not just one fixed point on a map. It is a fluid, fast-changing threat landscape stretching across hundreds of miles of Iranian coastline, with dozens of possible launch points, multiple shipping lanes, and vessel traffic moving in every direction around the clock. That is not something A-10s can fully cover, not even close. And that leads to the second issue, the one Iran already understands very well. Iran does not need to defeat the A-10 directly. It only needs to act in the gaps. Strike at midnight, move in poor weather, launch from positions hidden by coastal terrain, where boats can disappear from radar before targeting is locked in. Open pressure in 3 different locations at once, forcing a response to one threat while 2 others keep moving. The A-10 is, by nature, a reactive system. It responds only after a threat is detected, after intelligence is analyzed, after a sortie is cleared, and the aircraft is in the air. All of that takes time, and Iran decides when that countdown begins. That is the imbalance the footage does not show. Iran chooses the moment. The United States answers afterward. In that kind of structure, even outstanding tactical performance is still reactive by design. It means constantly trying to catch up to an opponent that controls the pace of the encounter. Iran has been working this angle for decades. It is not preparing for one decisive showdown. It is built around endurance, around keeping pressure in place longer than the other side's political system is comfortable paying to answer it. Iran can lose boats. It can lose personnel. It can absorb isolated clashes and still remain aligned with its broader strategy because the goal was never simply to win individual firefights. The goal is something larger. The objective is to make the strait feel impossible to fully control. Not necessarily impossible in reality, but impossible in perception. That difference is enormously expensive, and the cost grows over time. You do not need to sink tankers to shake global oil markets. You only need to make insurers nervous enough to raise the price of risk. You need shipping companies to decide that rerouting around Africa, adding 3 extra weeks and millions more per voyage, may be safer than operating inside uncertainty. You need oil prices to stay elevated long enough that economic pressure starts influencing political decisions in capitals far from the Gulf. That is the real objective: sustained disruption. Not clean victory, but steady pressure. This is a war of erosion, patient, dispersed, and built in a way that no single response tool can solve all at once. And erosion warfare has one feature that makes it especially resistant to impressive battlefield numbers. It does not require every asset to survive. It only requires the pressure to continue. That is the calculation the viral clips never show. Take out 10 boats and Iran still has many more. The least expensive fast attack craft can be replaced in a matter of days. The bases, the doctrine, the Revolutionary Guard structure, that 1,500-kilometer coastline packed with inlets and launch points, none of it disappears after a single engagement. You may win the clash in front of you, but the system generating the threat is still fully active. Disable 10 boats and more can appear tomorrow. Secure one sector and pressure simply shifts into the next. The opposing side does not need a dramatic victory. It only needs to keep you reacting, burning resources, staying on the defensive, and producing striking footage that satisfies the demand for visible action while the real problem remains exactly where it started. And the more heavily the A-10 is used, the more a fourth problem begins to grow. Every additional sortie over a congested international waterway creates another chance for a serious mistake. The Strait of Hormuz is not open, empty sea. It is one of the busiest maritime corridors in the world. Fishing boats, Coast Guard vessels, supply craft, commercial ships, traffic moving in every direction at every hour. In the heat blur of shallow coastal waters, at night, in bad weather, the difference between an Iranian fast attack craft and a civilian vessel can come down to seconds and incomplete data. That makes the A-10's targeting challenge here more than a battlefield issue. It carries legal consequences, political consequences, and diplomatic consequences that no amount of preparation can completely erase. One wrong strike does not just create a bad moment. It can reshape the entire meaning of the operation. It can hand Iran a narrative win worth far more than 100 boats taken out. It can weaken coalition backing. It can trigger international scrutiny. It can shift the story away from protecting maritime access and into something far more complicated and far more damaging. And the more sorties that happen, the more that risk grows. This is not about pilot skill or confidence. It is about probability increasing over time. Now step back, because this is the part that should really make people uneasy. What if the more effective the A-10 looks, the more boats disabled, the cleaner the footage, the higher the engagement tally, the less likely anyone becomes to ask the questions that actually matter? There is a familiar pattern in how institutions deal with genuinely difficult problems. When the real answer is slow, expensive, politically uncomfortable, and impossible to capture on camera, the pressure grows to present something that feels like an answer instead. Something immediate, something visible, something that makes a press briefing sound confident and complete. Engagement numbers can be counted, boats can be filmed, gun camera clips can be shared. And while those images spread, the harder questions are quietly pushed to later, and that later almost never comes. So the real questions stay unanswered. How do you build maritime awareness strong enough to spot a launch before it happens instead of responding after the fact? How do you create the sensor networks, coalition structures, and intelligence links that give you real control over the environment, not just a reactive presence inside it? How do you shift the calculation in Tehran so this kind of pressure campaign no longer feels worth pursuing? How do you change the game itself instead of just playing it with more intensity? None of that creates dramatic footage. There is no striking before and after shot, no simple briefing slide, no clip that spreads instantly online. It is years of work that rarely gets filmed, and it has to compete with the far easier message of pointing to cockpit footage and saying, "We've got this under control." But there is a version of this story where the situation is not under control at all. A version where every encounter looks like a success, while the larger problem keeps getting worse. Quietly. Gradually, almost invisibly, so slowly that no one notices the pattern until it is too obvious to ignore. That is the version people should worry about. Not because it is guaranteed, but because it does not announce itself. It does not fail in an obvious way. It fails convincingly, wrapped in strong visuals, accurate engagement numbers, and one tactical success after another, right up until the strategic cost shows up somewhere downstream in a form nobody expected. Real security in the Strait requires something the A-10 cannot provide by design: coverage without gaps. Not reactive presence, but predictive, continuous awareness that makes launching an operation feel pointless before the order is ever given. That means satellites, distributed surface sensors, undersea monitoring, regional allies connected through one shared operational picture. Real-time data fusion that shrinks the response window until surprise stops being an effective tactic. Diplomacy that raises the cost of escalation inside Iran's own political system. Economic pressure that influences decisions before they turn into action. In other words, a real theory of the problem, not just a weapon aimed at its symptoms. And Iran operates with one major advantage in this kind of contest. It does not face election cycles that reset priorities every 4 years. It does not have to explain its approach to an audience expecting visible progress every single week. It can lose boats, lose personnel, lose individual encounters, and still remain locked onto the same long-term strategy. That imbalance in institutional patience is not some minor detail. It may be the most important structural advantage in this entire contest, and no amount of cockpit footage changes that. And that leads to the hardest question of all. What if Iran does not need the A-10 to fall short? What if it needs the aircraft to look successful, clearly, loudly, convincingly enough that no one ever feels the urgency to have the more difficult conversation? Every viral clip is attention pulled away from the deeper structural gaps. Every engagement tally becomes a substitute for the indicators that would actually show whether the broader situation is improving. Every press briefing focused on boats taken out is a briefing not focused on persistent maritime awareness, coalition coordination, or the long-term architecture needed to secure the strait. The Warthog is an extraordinary aircraft. The GAU-8 is one of the most effective systems ever built for the role it was designed to perform. The pilots flying these missions are operating with real precision in genuinely demanding conditions. But that is not the central issue. The real question is whether that level of excellence applied to this specific problem produces what the mission actually demands. The A-10 does not come up short because it lacks power. It does not fail in an obvious way. It fails persuasively, and that is exactly what makes it so difficult to challenge. Because the Strait of Hormuz does not judge outcomes by optics, it does not reward dramatic footage or confident press briefings. It rewards the side that correctly identifies the real problem and builds a response that matches that reality, not the version that happens to look strong on camera. And right now, it is possible that one side understands that distinction more clearly than the other. And if that is true, then the most dangerous tool in the Strait of Hormuz may not be Iran's fast boat fleet at all. It may be the camera footage that makes the situation look more under control than it really is.